Now let us talk about the indirect utility function. Indirect utility function. Before diving into the numerical problems of determining the indirect utility function, at first I will talk about the definition of indirect utility function. Now basically the direct utility function. Direct utility function, or basically there is no such term like direct utility function, but normally utility function is represented as u is equal to x1 into x2, or basically I want to say that utility is a function of x1 and x2, and if you are consuming 3 commodities then it is x3, if you are consuming 4 commodities then it is x4. So this is the utility function, this is the form it looks like. So that means the amount of the commodity that you are consuming, utility is a function of the amount of the commodities or the quantity of the commodities that you are consuming. What is indirect utility function? Indirect utility function is the function of price of the commodities. Suppose P1 is the price of x1, P2 is the function of x2. Similarly, x3, for x3, P3 is the price of x3. For x4, suppose P4 is the function of is the price of x4, and the income of the consumer, that is suppose M or I. So when we represent utility as a function of price of the commodities and the income of the consumer, then it becomes indirect utility function. Okay, now here a mathematical or numerical problem is given towards us. Here in this mathematical problem or numerical problem, let me clear the board. Now here in this mathematical or numerical problem, x1 star is given as alpha into m by p1 and x2 star is given as 1 minus alpha into m by p2, and utility is a function of x1 and x2, that is a direct utility function. Derive the indirect utility function. Now for diving into the indirect utility function, or for deriving the indirect utility function, we have to write that v of p2, p1 and m, that is obviously, as I have said, that indirect utility function is a function of price of the commodities and income. Now utility function is x1 into x2. That was also given in the question, but I have somehow missed that part of the question. I am writing it here so that you guys will understand it. Utility is given as x1 into x2. So if this is the function of utility, then if we just plot the value of x1 and the value of x2 from the given values, then that becomes the function. Suppose we are writing it as v. Now v is the notation for the indirect utility function. So it will now become alpha m by p1 to the power alpha well, I think the direct utility function is given as x1 alpha and x2 to the power 1 minus alpha. So now if we put the value of x1 here, it will be to the power alpha, and similarly in the case of x2, 1 minus alpha into m by p2 to the power 1 minus alpha, because that is actually given in the function of utility, that is x1 to the power alpha into x2 to the power 1 minus alpha. Now if we calculate the values, then it becomes m into alpha by p1 to the power alpha into 1 minus alpha by p2 to the power 1 minus alpha. This is basically the function of income, and p1, that is the price of first commodity, and p2, that is the price of the second commodity. So this is the indirect utility function, and it has been obtained from the direct utility function. And what was the direct utility function given in the question? The direct utility function that was given in the question, but I somehow missed to write the question for you. The direct utility function that was given in the question was x1 to the power alpha and x2 to the power 1 minus alpha. Here the values of x1 and x2 are given, so it was very simple question. Just we have to substitute the value of x1 and x2 to get the indirect utility function. But the next question will be not that so simpler. Now in this question there is a utility function that is given as x into y, and our budget constant is given as m equals to px into x by plus py into y. Now if we have to find out the indirect utility function, then there is a method that we can apply. We can also apply the Lagrangian method. I have used that method to find out the indirect utility function in some of my videos, but in this video I am going to take a different approach. In this approach I am going to find out the marginal utility of x, that is the partial derivative of the utility function with respect to x, that will be equals to y, and marginal utility of y, that is the partial derivative of utility function with respect to y, that will be equal to x. As we know that the consumer equilibrium is the point where the indifference curve and the budget line intersects, and at this point marginal utility ratio of the marginal utility of both the commodities, that is marginal utility of x and marginal utility of y, the ratio of these two marginal utilities is equal to price of the both the commodities. So that is p of x by p of y. Here we have written that same thing, but we have actually done a little bit modification and written this. Now just putting the values of mu x and mu y from these obtained values, we are getting the value of y, that is y into py by px. Similarly, putting the value of x, that is py into y by px, into the budget line, that was m equals to px into x plus py into y, we have obtained the value of y, that is m by 2 py, and again putting the value of y into the budget line, we have obtained the value of x, that is x equals to m by 2 px. Putting the value of x and y in the utility function, we are getting the value of indirect utility function, that is m square by 4 px py. So we can easily see that utility at first was the function of x and y only, but now utility has become the function of m and p of x and p of y, that means price of x and y. So now the utility is basically the function of income and the price of x and y, so it is the indirect utility function. So I am again saying the definition of indirect utility function, that indirect utility function is the function where utility is a function of price of the commodities and the income of the consumer.